Good evening. It is the 22nd of January 2023. You're tuned to Sunday Express. Tonight, as the statistics indicate that 9 women lose their lives on a daily owing to cervical cancer, while 9 out of 10 persons who actually contract cervical cancer succumb to the disease. Tonight, we're going to be putting the status of the cancer burden into perspective. But before we speak matters of health, let us have a quick look at what has been making headlines in the last 12 hours.
Mimi siwezi kuruhusu ati watu wachache waende kona pale ati wanatupangia sijui maandamano ati sisi tuwache kushughulikia mahitaji ya wananchi wa Kenya ati sisi tukuje hapo ati tushughulikie mahitaji yao.
Move on. President William Ruto tells off the opposition over the claims that the August 9th, 2022 elections were rigged. Oasis of Hope. Women-led community-based organization in Bamba, Kilifi County, reaping big from aquaculture. And hail the new volleyball queens. Kenya Pipeline crowned the 2023 Kenya Volleyball Federation National League champions. Well, good evening once again. This is Sunday Express. I'm Regina, Manyara, and our sign language interpreter tonight is Byron Agondor. We have so much lined up for you, including what is happening in as far as the sporting arena is concerned. I know if you're a sporting fan, you must be watching Arsenal versus Manchester United. They said much payment your best. We had Manchester United making the first score at 14 minutes, but Arsenal equalized in the next few minutes. We'll wait to see what happens in the outcome of that particular derby that has been dubbed on social media Arsenal versus Kiburi FC. But before we speak what is happening in sports, let us bring you up to speed with what is happening in the political scene. Now, President William Ruto has told off the opposition over its claims that the August 9th, 2022 elections were bungled. The president said he will not be distracted from the cause of unity and delivering development across all parts of the country, calling on the opposition to move on.
In his first response to presidential election victory claims made by the Azimio la Umoja One Kenya coalition, citing an anonymous whistleblower, President William Ruto laughed off the rigging claims as baseless. Speaking after an interdenominational Thanksgiving service in Kerugoya, Kirinyaga County, the head of state said the outcome of a general election not only reflected transparency, but also cemented Kenya's position in the League of Nations.
Despite all the plans and schemes, God not only gave us a peaceful election, but in this election we demonstrated as the people of Kenya that we can vote on issues, not tribes. We can vote on an agenda, not mere rhetoric.
While Azimio has called a rally on Monday in Nairobi to react to the alleged dossier, a tough-talking President Ruto said he will not allow the country to be held hostage.
I want to promise Kenya that we will not allow our country to be a hostage to threats and blackmail by a few people who are looking for their personal interest. We are going to serve all Kenyans equally, irrespective of how they voted, because we want to move our country to the next level.
Hii mambo ya hii mzee tuachie. Dawa ya hii mtu ni mtoto ya maumau. Wewe kaa kando. Kaa kando. Wewe rais, please, endelea na mambo ya uchumi, utusaidie. Mambo ya hustlers fund, utusaidie. Utafute pesa ya kulipa barabara, uniunge mkono na hawa, utusaidie. Mambo ya chai, kahawa, mchele, tusaidie. Mambo ya hii mzee, wewe kaa kando.
The head of state maintains he's focused on delivering unity and development to all parts of the country and will not entertain distraction.
Mimi siwezi kuruhusu ati watu wachache waende kona pale ati watupangie njama ya kututisha, ati wanatupangia sijui maandamano, ati sisi tuache kushughulikia mahitaji ya wananchi wa Kenya, ati sisi tukuje hapo ati tushughulikie mahitaji yao. Wamezoea hiyo tabia, lakini we are telling them the end has come. There is no more. Ile mulipata kwa vitisho sasa iwatoshe. Wacha sasa tufanyie kazi wananchi wa taifa letu la Kenya.
Kama hawakukuweza, walipokunyanyasa, wamekuacha nje, wamedhulumu kila mtu ambaye amekuongelesha, watakuwezaje sasa? Umesonga karibu zaidi na Mungu, alafu huko na serikali. I don't know whether you know there was a meeting in Mombasa ya viongozi kadhaa na wanajijua, and I'll tell you their names. Nao ndio wana finance huyu mzee, na ndo tunataka kuambia hata wao wafanye nini, wakome.
Na kwa hiyo maandamano, mimi nitakuombea ruhusa hata kwa rais wetu, ikiwezekana hata serikali ipelekee watu maji pale na hata soda. Wakiandamana wanakunywa kidogo, wanarudi maandamano. Lakini wacha kutishia wa Kenya, my friend.
President Ruto also alleged a scheme by so-called cartels to destabilize his government, owing to the reforms he has instituted in the tea, coffee and milk subsectors.
Wapange maandamano kwa wanataka, lakini kwa kahawa na chai na kwa maziwa watatoka.
Rais, na wewe utuchunge tafadhali. Hii watu ni kali, lakini tutangangana. Kama hatukutishwa na watu ya system na deep state na Azimio, hawa watu wanatuweza.
The president noting that the country has enough resources for development and paying off debts, ruling out any tax waivers for individuals and companies. John Jacob Curia, Sunday Express.
Well, my colleague Jen Jacob Curia would have been with us tonight, but he had been preparing that report there from Kirinyaga. Now we take you to what is happening at the National Assembly, where Speaker Moses Wetangula has called for the unity of purpose among the Luhya community as the Western Kenyan region strategizes itself in national politics. Speaking at a funds drive in Lihembera, Friends Churchill Kolomani, Kakamega County, Wetangula urged the leaders and residents to unite and rally behind their kingpin for their region to attract more development in the current and future governments.
National Assembly Speaker further claims the move by the region to unanimously support Kenya Kwanza government will not only attract news development in the region, but also see to it that stalled projects have been completed.
If we want to stand on whichever side, wacha tusimame pamoja. And if we stand together, we will always tilt the scales. Bungoma peke yake ilivyosimama pamoja ndiye aliangusha ratili ya kura. Wakati nimependekezwa na Kenya Kwanza, and if we become our brothers and our sisters keeper, the future will be different. On our own kama jamii, we cannot produce a leader. But on our own, if we are not united, we shall not be attractive to others. Tukiwa united, then others will see our unity as a sign of attraction.
Sentiments echoed by area MPs led by Sirisi MP John Waluke and Deputy Governor of Kakamega Ayub Savola.
Tunataka tuwe na umoja. Na tumeileta, tunaenda kwa MCAs wetu wote. Tutaita meeting ya MCAs wote ya Western. Tunataka wamama nyinyi, kampeni ile mnapiga na wazee na vijana wetu, watoto wetu, ya kwamba umoja ya watu wa Western lazima itimishwe. Tukienda kwa kura ambaye inakuja, tunaenda kama jamii, tunapiga kura pamoja. Umoja wetu ndio nguvu wetu.
Meanwhile, the Senate Committee on Devolution was on Sunday in Meru County to establish whether the hostility between the Meru County MCAs and the Meru governor has been resolved. Speaking shortly after the closed-door meeting, the leaders said plans are underway to broker a truce between the MCAs and the governor to spur development in Meru.
And we have also agreed that we keep on talking so that we can be able to bring the executive and the assembly together for working together, and also to ensure that the people of Meru really benefits for the next remaining 4.5 years as they expected when they elected the leaders that they have elected.
We look forward to the consultations happening well, and I believe in the next few weeks we will see a more cooperative kind of relationship between the executive of Meru and the county assembly, and we wish them the very best.
Elsewhere, Nairobi County Governor Johnson Sakaja now wants his move to work with members of the county assembly from various political parties to deliver services replicated at the national levels in efforts to forge national unity. Sakaja, who spoke in Busia County, claimed those keen on spearheading politics of division could find themselves cornered in the event the opposition and the government decide to work together.
So wale ambao wanajaribu kuleta kelele kwa sababu Sakaja anafanya kazi na Azimio na UDA, look for division elsewhere. Ile siku mtaona Raila Odinga na Ruto wamekaa pamoja, mtakuwa na aibu kubwa sana, because our country cannot be divided again, and it will not be divided.
As the political scene continued getting heated, parents, teachers, learners and learners are bracing for a 36-week-long basic education school calendar after the schedule returns to normalcy starting January 23rd. Now, according to the Ministry of Education, all pre-primary, primary and secondary schools are set to open on Monday for the first time. The calendar had been disrupted by COVID-19.
According to the Ministry of Education, from Monday, January 23rd, 2023, the basic education calendar will revert to 3 terms as it was before the COVID-19 pandemic. A circular to senior education officials says the fee structures shall remain as it was 2 years ago. In the new school calendar, all pre-primary, primary and secondary schools will report for the first term on Monday, January 23rd, 2023 and close on Friday, April 21st, 2023 after 13 weeks of learning. Second term will also be 13 weeks. Dates are Monday, May 8th to Friday, August 11th, with a midterm break from Thursday, June 29th to Sunday, July 2nd, 2023. The term will run for 10 weeks from Monday, August 28th to Saturday, November 11th to pave way for December holidays, which will take place from November 3rd to January 2024. This means that the Kenya Certificate of Primary Education KCPE national exams are scheduled for Monday, November the 6th to Thursday, November the 9th, while the Kenya Certificate of Secondary Education KCSE exam commences from Friday, November 10th to Friday, December 1st for 3 weeks. Meanwhile, the first cohort of grade 7 learners report on Monday, January 30th, 2023, while reporting period for Form 1 students is between Monday, February 6th and Monday, February 13th, 2023.
Now, Interpeace Kenya and leaders from the security-prone zone areas are now backing the government to arm the National Police Reservists. Now, speaking in Tagule Bay, Tiati constituency in Baringo County during a 2-day meeting, the leaders said the escalating conflict in banditry zone areas can only be curbed by arming the National Police Reservists. The development comes as Defense Cabinet Secretary Aiden Duale says the government will not tolerate anyone keen on destabilizing security in the country.
Interpeace Kenya has changed its stand on arming National Police Reservists in insecurity-prone areas, saying the continued conflicts in the region has escalated. Speaking in Tangule Bay, Tiati constituency in Baringo County, in a 2-day meeting, the leaders say the government should arm the reservists.
KBR sopewe bunduki, sasa tunasema peana kwa sababu uwezi kuwa na mtu mmoja ambaye anakuja na mimine risasi vile anataka na wengine hawana risasi.
Wase watangulie kuomba nyasi na wakisha omba nyasi kupewa, chukua listi ya vijana yenu wote wenye wanaenda kuchunga ng'ombe na kupeana kwa administration. Ile jambo lolote likifanyika mahali pale, basi wafuate kuanzia wale vijana ile listi ya majina ambayo imepeana.
The peace mission comes in the wake of simmering tension in Kerio region, where 2 people were shot dead in Chesegon area in the border of Elgeyo Marakwet and West Pokot counties.
Tunastahili kutafuta mbinu badala na tuende turudi nyuma tuone ni wapi tulikosea, kama tulikosea Mungu ama tulijikosea ama tulikosea nani.
Iko wazee wanabariki vijana kutenda dhambi. Sasa hawa wako pande yenu ama wako pande gani? Wanatusaidia ama watusaidii?
This even as the government has reiterated that it will ensure all citizens are safeguarded and curb insecurity cases that derail development.
Nataka tushikane, tusikubali. Tunajenga barabara kutoka Lamu mpaka Isiolo Marsabit. Hiyo barabara tumeweka investment mingi ya security.
Elsewhere, Kamkunji Sub-County Police Commander Francis Ngugi has urged Buruburu residents to work harmoniously with the police to reduce crime.
Lakini katika kupata information kutoka kwa wananchi wanatupatia ambayo tunashirikia mara hiyo ndio imefanya vitu zimerudi chini. Hata kusema kweli hata wananchi hapa wana appreciate.
Sisi wenyewe hatuwezi ku fight crime tukiwa peke yetu. So members of the public feel free, Buruburu ama ofisi yote wakati yote unaweza kuingia.
Finally, in Murang'a County, Ahadi Kenya Trust has brought together taxi drivers and security agents in a bid to promote community policing.
I'm urging each and every other person to be able to come out. Let's continue mixing and talking to the police officers. Let's talk to the business community so that we can be able to enhance our security.
Also sensitized them to be ambassadors there on the ground because they normally work at odd hours. They move here and there and they can come across anything.
Tumepata hiyo link. Tukipata jambo yoyote ya uhalifu ama jambo yoyote ya kutusubua tuwe tuna communicate na police, na wamesema watakuwa wakitusaidia, watakuwa on the spot.
Ruth Wamboi for Sunday Express.
Now from security, we focus on matters of food security, where over 100,000 farmers in Trans Nzoia County have registered on the e-wallet system in readiness for the distribution of subsidized fertilizer. President William Ruto is expected to oversee the subsidized fertilizer distribution across the 38 wards in Trans Nzoia in a program that has been ongoing.
Last year, an inter-agency team was constituted to fast-track registration of farmers across 38 counties to ease access of the subsidized fertilizer. Kenya National Trading Corporation and Carol have already mapped agro dealers at the ward level who would be linked with farmers on the e-wallet system in a movement to eliminate cartels and middlemen.
Anybody who wants to get fertilizer are expected to fill those forms, apply. As long as they are farmers, you do an application, your registration is taken by the area assistant chief, is swept to the central place, and every farmer will be given 2 bags of fertilizer per acre. So the more the farmers will register, the more the fertilizer we're going to get. I like this program because there's no discrimination at all.
Hata wakao wengine wanakuja kututoa kwa manyumba tuende kwa ofisi ya chief tuandike. Unajaza form, unasema kiasi yenye unalima. Kwa hivyo watu tumejitolea wengi sana. Kwa sababu tukienda kwa board tunapata wale wana mashamba kubwa wametumalizia mbolea. Sisi wa mashamba ndogo hatupati mbolea mpaka tunapata mwezi wa 6 kama wakati imeisha.
Over 100,000 farmers in Trans Nzoia County have so far registered on the platform for the registration exercise that came to a close today, although some farmers are seeking an extension.
Hiyo mpango ni mzuri kwa sababu unapata nyumba 10 wanakuja wakitembea kwa kila boma wakiandika watu. Ule anataka kulima, juu unapata wengine saa hii hata roho ya kulima ilikuwa imeisha. Kwa hivyo nilikuwa naomba kama hiyo mbolea kusema ukweli iko inakuja itatusaidia. Naona hata wale walikuwa wameisha roho ya kulima, tutazidi na kulima na watafufua roho ya kulima na watu watachangamuka.
Farmers like David Simeyu want the government to reduce the cost of fertilizer.
Hakika hiyo kitu mkulima mdogo bado hajafaidika kabisa. Kwa sababu gani? Hawa wakulima wakubwa hii mbolea inapofika hawa huwa ananyakua yote.
Ukulima ni karama. Kwa ajili tuseme hivyo, kama juzi la sia tununua mfuko moja shilingi 7,000. Juzi tumesikia president ametupunguzia, imekuwa shilingi 3,500. Na hasa mimi mkiona hivi nalima shamba kubwa, ningekubali president kama angekuwa na njia nyingine afinye kuja 2,500, wakulima tungefurahia, tungejaribu sana tuwe na chakula mingi, kwa vile sasa tutakuwa tumekuja nafuu kwa ground.
Farmers in Trans Nzoia County have welcomed the move by the government to start distributing of the subsidized fertilizer, saying that fertilizer has been expensive for a long time, but with this program, farm inputs will be affordable and the cost of production will go down, thereby increasing the country's food security. Wairi Mojenga for Prime Edition.
On that report, where we are in as far as matters of food security is concerned, takes us to a fast break this evening. Remember, Arsenal and Manchester United are still on a 2-2 draw. By the end of the course of this program, who is going to carry the day? To keep us company, we take a quick breather. We'll be right back.
With Glovo, you have anything you want from your city in your hands. Kama unatamani ugali beef ama fried chicken, order Glovo ujaribu restaurant mpya. Tamu. Kama game inawaka na unataka drinks zaidi, order Glovo ushangilie timu yako. Na kama your little one amemes na diaper zimeisha, order Glovo and save the day. With Glovo, unaweza track order yako na kuongea na customer support, which is always available. Download the app and order anything you want from your city. We'll deliver.
Nimesahau kucheza Loto Moto. Usisahau kucheza Loto Moto. Shinda milioni 2 kila siku kwenye M-Pesa. Chagua lipa na M-Pesa. Paybill number 757070. Account number andika neno Loto. Kisha weka star na nambari yako ya simu. Weka kiwango chochote cha pesa kuanzia shilingi 50 hadi 2000.
Aulali.
Lipa kisha subiri draw. Welala. Nitakutimizia ndoto zako. Milioni 2 usiamini. Ujumbe huu umeidhinishwa na BCLB.
Barama te barikena na mekena kawakapu.
Kwani wewe una shida gani?
Ebu relax. Wewe umeniambia ni kubaya, bahali yake anakimbia. Wewe pia unakimbia. Mnakimbia nini?
Mwicha leo. Mwicha.
Nini kimefanyika? Sasa
atuachi.
Hands up. You are arrest.
Angalia huyo vizuri, angalia mrembo vizuri, angalia msichana. Umemwona wapi?
Mimi si tu huyu mama.
Wewe mimi ni mamako, hauna adabu hata kidogo.
Mogoga. Mogoga. Hii hapa unaona? Yani ni keki, ugali mgoga.
Unacho usuli wa ugali ni mocha, vitamini zake yani unacho ni kitu imekombiniwa pamoja, haina cholesterol, hainone.
Do you have a new story to share with KBC? Get in touch swiftly on email news@kbc.co.ke or call 0723-892-654 or 0734-780-124.
You're watching Sunday Express and I am Regina Manyara. In the less than 2 weeks, Nairobi is going to be hosting the National Cancer Summit that is between the 2nd and the 4th of February. Will it meet the objectives in as far as elevating the struggles of those who have contracted cancer? Well, and this and so much more is going to be put into perspective as we look at the status of cancer prevalence in the country, looking at the prevalence rate as well as the recent interventions and what you can do as a citizenry, given that we are in the budget making process, to implore the government to make the cost and access of cancer treatment more affordable and accessible. But for now, let's now switch to matters of agriculture, where the deep within the semi-arid locale of Bamba, Ward Ganze constituency, Kilifi County, now lies an oasis that has transformed the livelihoods of the residents of Kavunzoni village through aquaculture. It started off as a missed opportunity and it has turned into a money-making business enterprise for less fortunate in the country. Our reporter Junai Karisa unravels the life-changing fortunes of residents who were at the brink of starvation due to the ravaging drought.
In the semi-arid vast vegetation of Ganze constituency, deep within the dried suburbs of Bamba Ward, lies an oasis, a makeshift heaven for the residents of Kavunzoni village, who not only quench their thirst from it, but also enrich their pockets through aquaculture. The ravaging drought that has hit Kilifi County in the recent past forced the villagers to approach well-wishers to drill a borehole for the community.
Hawa wanajamii walisaidiwa na kikundi kinachoitwa Kitanda, wakatoboa manji. Yale manji ikawa na chumvi. Ndio sasa hiyo manji haikuweza kunywika, haingekuwa nzuri ya kunywa.
After staying without non-consumable water for close to a year, the determined community will make another attempt to make hay while the sun shone upon them. Positive assessments by researchers from the Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institute (KEMFRI) and the promise of technical support gave them the green light.
Wale samaki tunaofuga hapa ni tilapia. Lakini ile tilapia tunafuga hapa ni wale tunaita marine tilapia. Kulingana na utafiti wetu, wakipewa chakula mzuri, kuna conditions mzuri, environment mzuri, hii katika miezi 6 watakuwa wale tunaita table size. Kitu kama 250 grams to 350 grams. Na hiyo ni kama shilingi 300-500 kwa samaki moja.
Tukaanza na madingwi 3, wakatuletea samaki tukafuga. Kila dingwi lilikuwa na samaki 300. Pauza tukaleta samaki wa madingwi 6. Kila dingwi likawa liko na samaki 300.
After 12 months of successful fish rearing, the community decided to expand the business.
60% of the input in terms of aquaculture inakuwa ni samaki, inakuwa ni chakula na mbegu. Sasa mbegu tumewasaidia nayo kama taasisi. Na tumewafunza kutengeneza chakula wakitumia mbinu na wakitumia what we call local ingredients.
Kwa siku natumia kama kilo 7. Sasa kilo 7 kwa mwezi ndio unapata hiyo idadi ya hizo kilo ambazo zinatumika kwa mwezi.
Customer ni anji, kukukareni anji na hata maeneo mengine kumbola Bamba na sehemu nyingine za Chira makuko customer anji. Kuna ngine tani kuza makahala kare kilo 15 kwa jumla. Ari manahala kilo 10, ari hangine kilo 5. Roma manahala ha mtani kare makigusa. Ndio unapatana dimaka hala here kilo 2, kilo 5.
Helen Kadi, a member of the community-based organization, reveals entrepreneurial opportunities available.
Naona Honda nina dimani nikapata hata fee ya mhoho na nikapata hata kala pengine kuna hatundo za kwa manyumbani finadi mafika nisaidia. Ni muzo na zajaribu kushauriani mamanje hata kuku mazi ungekaisa kikikundi.
Kilifi County Deputy Governor Flora Chibule has lauded the initiative, noting the need to replicate it in similar geographical locations in the region.
Vile tumegundua ya kwamba KEMFRI wana ule welevu kugundua ya kwamba maji kama yale yaweza ku add value. Ndio maana nikasema waanze mwanzo vile sasa tuko hapa Bamba, waanze polepole Kaloleni yako maeneo, Rabai pale. Tuanze huku mwanzo. Tunapovuka ule upande wa pili, tutawapeleka mpaka kule Adu.
Kuhimiza watu kama hawa wa arid and semi-arid areas, wale wako wanajua mambo ya samaki ni nini. Samaki itakuwa mingi kwa inchi, bei tutajaribu maintain the price. Sasa kuagiza samaki nje haitakuwa jambo tena.
What started as a missed opportunity has turned into a gold mine here for the locals who are waiting for the next catch. What is your excuse? From Kavunzoni, Ganze constituency, Kilifi County, I'm Junai Karisa Mbele.
Nimesahau kucheza Loto Moto. Usisahau kucheza Loto Moto. Shinda milioni 2 kila siku kwenye Kwenye M-Pesa, chagua lipa na M-Pesa. Paybill number 757070. Account number andika neno Loto, kisha weka star na nambari yako ya simu. Weka kiwango chochote cha pesa kuanzia shilingi 50 hadi 2,000.
Aulali.
Lipa kisha subiri draw. Welala, nitakutimizia ndoto zako. Milioni 2 usiamini. Ujumbe huu umeidhinishwa na BCLB.
I know you're worried about him. Boys and their dads. Did I say something wrong?
Well, tell me how you really feel. You know what matters? Ni ati umerudi kazi. Na kama kuna mtu anaweza kulainisha hii kampuni ni wewe.
Ambia mama hivyo. Hiyo ni ukweli. She would do a perfect job.
Kisima Drops will have to go on, even without our dear Melissa. So, please join me in welcoming our latest addition to the company, my daughter Zawadi.
Well, good evening. So tonight we're going to be putting matters of the status of the country in regard to cancer prevalence. Statistics indicate that at least 9 persons women especially, lose their lives on account of HPV, that is cervical cancer, while 9 out of 10 those who contract or cervical cancer actually succumb to the disease. Tonight, the status of matters of cancer are going to be put into perspective, and our guest tonight is none other than Dr. Miriam Mutebi, who is the chairperson of the Kenya Society of Hematology and Oncology, abbreviated as KESHO. Thank you very much, ma'am, for your time.
Thank you.
Let's start out from there. Let's know, where are we as a country when it comes to cancer prevalence?
So I think one of the first things that we do need to keep in mind, Regina, is we are actually in the middle of what we call a syndemic, which is basically a constellation of very many different pandemics. We've just recently come off the COVID, and we're seeing an emergence of both non-communicable diseases and cancer especially. And if we look at data from the recent Commission on just cancer in sub-Saharan Africa, what we do see is that over the last 30 years, our numbers have doubled. And what should be more alarming is by 2020, if we look at the numbers, we saw that 500,000 Africans died as a result of their cancer. And what should really give us a call to arms is that if left unchecked, this number is likely to double by 2030. Sort of circling closer to home, we see that the patients who are diagnosed every year tend to be around about 42,000 patients. And again, what we do see as well is a very high, what we call incidence to mortality ratio, meaning that patients who are diagnosed die from their cancer. So we see about 27,000 deaths. However, at any one time, we have about 82,000 patients living with a diagnosis of cancer. And I would say in the last 10 years or so, we have seen considerable increases in terms of availability of cancer services. I think we do need to acknowledge the couple of strides that have been made over the last 10 years. One, we have a very rich policy as relates to both the defining screening guidelines, treatment guidelines for cancer patients, and more recently over the pandemic, we have recently launched a palliative care policy and palliative and supportive care. We've seen an increase in the number of cancer services available. We've seen a development of both regional centers that provide cancer services, whether it's surgery, chemotherapy. We now have 11 centers in the country where one can receive both surgery and chemotherapy. And we've seen an expansion or decentralization of radiotherapy services. What used to happen 10 years ago is everyone across the country would have to go to the main tertiary referral in Nairobi at Kenyatta
that
to
is
receive.
the Kenyatta National Hospital. Now this has been devolved, somewhat devolved to the region.
Precisely.
Maybe you can just give us a breakdown, because what we have noticed in some of the challenges in regard to, access is the issue of awareness. Where do I seek medical attention? Maybe you can break it down to just give us where we have these regional centers across the country.
Sure. So far we have the main, keep in mind we have both public and private, and really there's opportunities and areas to think about how can we, develop our collective strengths. And so in terms of the public facilities, we do have the main referral centers. That's a Kenyatta Hospital, the Kenyatta Teaching and Referral, University Teaching and Referral. We have the Mombasa Comprehensive Cancer Center. We've recently introduced radiotherapy services as well in both Nakuru and Garissa. So really trying to ensure that this access continues, and they are planned to upgrade several centers over the next couple of years. But I think, and you did highlight one of the key areas, Regina, is that the challenges, despite these ongoing efforts, the majority of our patients are still diagnosed with advanced disease and frequently do not complete their care. And if we do a deeper dive into the reasons behind this, we see a constellation of factors. One, the fact that patients have to pay out of pocket in order for them to access care. I would say we've seen considerable improvement in the number of patients who are completing their cancer journey just as a result of the National Hospital Insurance Fund starting to support some of the costs of care. But because cancer care is expensive anywhere in the world, then you still find that there are patients who have what we call financial toxicity or catastrophic health expenditure, meaning that they have to sell things and sometimes are not able to complete their care. If we look, sorry.
No, yes. Now, before we look at, the cost of care, maybe you can, from where you sit, tell us, given the data and the research that you have undertaken, what is the most prevalent form of cancer within our country? Because we know research is done in Africa and globally, and we have different data. But then what are we suffering from when it comes to cancer?
Sure. If we look at the prevalence of cancers in Kenya, and this is from the Global Cancer Repository, where we look at data that's supplied by our two cancer registries that are in Nairobi and Eldoret, we see that the top cancers in Kenya are breast cancer, followed closely by cervical cancer, prostate cancer, and then esophageal and colorectal cancers are the top 5 cancers in the country.
Okay.
Of course, we do have underreporting because we don't necessarily have a national cancer registry, but those are part of the ongoing efforts that are being done by the National Cancer Control Program and the cancer registry team to ensure that we're actually able to capture a true sense of what's going on across
Now, talking
the country.
about capturing the true sense of what is happening on ground. Let's talk about research, because without research we'll not have the requisite data to help us come up with policy as well as also interventions that are tailor-made for the country. What do you think? Have we done enough to ensure that we have localized research that is going to influence treatment of cancers that are prevalent in the country?
I think, Regina, we're just merely skimming the surface. We're looking at some of the data that we did really more on a global level, looking at where do we lie in terms of cancer research. And what we realized is that if we look at a continent, Africa as a continent, we see that we are only, sub-Saharan Africa that is only contributing, cancer research specifically is only 8% of the burden of the bulk of research that's coming out. And then we break it down further, we're saying in sub-Saharan Africa, we're only contributing 14% of that research. Now, sort of driving closer to home, we see that we're definitely having we've done some preliminary data and looking at just over the last 12 years how much research has been generated, and what we've seen is that we've had about 700 publications, which is just really looking at research and dissemination of research. We've seen around 700 papers roughly. What should at least give us a bit more drive is 40% of those have been had a Kenyan author or a researcher. However, only 91 of those papers were prominently, like I would say, Kenyan-driven, meaning that we are deciding on the research questions and the research topics. But that really speaks to the underlying problem, which is a lack of funding and development in research.
So are you saying it is not enough, that we're not contributing enough, or we are not investing enough as a country towards research that is tailor-made for us when we talk about matters of cancer, Dr.
Absolutely. I think we're only starting to see an increase. One, I would say, let's acknowledge one, if we look at what's happened over the last 10 years, you would say, if we looked at by 2007, we had about 9 papers on cancer. By 2021, we had over 100 papers a year on cancer, which definitely shows there's an increase. But if we look at the, in terms of the funding or resources available for not just cancer research, but research in general, we see that, I think by 2012, there was a resolution by the African Union countries to devote at least 1% of their GDP towards research and development. And so part of the call from us, from the oncology fraternity, is if we could even just have 10% of that towards cancer research, we would go a long way. Because what's happening is, because we do not drive our own agenda, then the agenda is determined by external funders. And so, whoever pays the piper is the one who plays the tune. Exactly.
So the tune, and we're talking about where we are when looking at the prevalence. Exactly. So from where you sit, let me understand is that you're saying that we have not done enough to ensure that we have the requisite budgetary allocation to fund a research that would now in turn influence policy implementation to tackle the issue that is cancer. So from where you sit, what recommendations would you have to streamline the issue of research in the country when it comes to cancer?
I think we need to acknowledge the role of our academic institutions. Academic institutions should be given the autonomy to source for funding and actually have be able to drive their own agenda, because they're probably, we have, I think, one of the greatest levels of collaboration in the East African region. If you look at who's funding our research, we have a really good collaborative base. But until we put our money where our mouth is, for want of a better word, then we're not necessarily going to be able to drive the agenda. And driving the agenda doesn't mean just providing funding. It's where is the expertise. If we look at our disease burden, for instance, we say the majority of our patients are diagnosed with advanced cancers. So we need to look at what are the supportive needs of our patients, what are the patient journeys, how do we interrogate what are the challenges our patients are going through, and then design interventions to do that. And in order to do that effectively, you do need a skill set. It's not just the actual researcher. It's the person handling the granting that's been funded. It's the economist guy who's looking at, is this cost effective? Because we do need to look at value-based care. We can't afford to just throw money at things. We have to think about what strategies can we have,
and it has to start from somewhere, because we tend to believe that there are some forms of cancer that are otherwise preventive. Let's look at HPV. The government worked, I think, 2 years back to actually roll out a campaign to encourage persons and actually parents to have their children vaccinated against HPV. From where you sit within the value chain, has it been taken up?
I think there has been a moderate uptake. However, some of the challenges that exist have really been around myths and misconceptions. And that's really part of the, we did talk about the financing, but we haven't talked about one of the major barriers to access to care, which is really the socio-cultural barriers that exist. And this is because quite a number of myths and misconceptions have been associated with HPV, whereas we know that most people, most adults, certainly by the time ladies getting to, most women getting to 50 have had at least exposure. 80 to 90% of the population have been exposed to HPV. But what happens is that for most people, they're able to clear that. They're able to clear the virus successfully. However, it's only in a certain cohort where it actually progresses to cervical cancers. However, when we talk about HPV vaccines, there's always that, is this going to maybe encourage indiscriminate sexual behavior, or are we having a judgment call around sexuality? So we really need to start to have these conversations in open spaces. We've known from the data that HPV does not necessarily increase your risk of sexual, partners or whatever, but it's looking at if you look at the risk versus benefit, because people sometimes have worries about fertility, or will this affect my fertility, none of that has actually been proven. And we do know that the vaccine is safe, and it does reduce the risk of cervical cancer in people who've been vaccinated by up to 90%. And this is a largely preventable illness. And so really, in terms of looking at how do we strategize around this, it's not just a health perspective, it's really around education and empowerment, because as much as we're talking about demystifying and stigmatizing some of these, it really comes down to what is the literacy level in the population. Again, beyond literacy, what are the patients able to understand, or what are the population able to understand about the benefits? But beyond that, how do they then have the agency or economic wherewithal to actually access care? Because it's not just enough to have the HPV vaccine. You do need to go for screening. But then that then brings in the case, how do I then, prioritize screening? Because one, is it our health-seeking behavior? Because as you and I know, Regina, sometimes the narrative that we have in many of our communities is, why am I going to look for trouble?
Yes, if I am not actually bedridden, I do not need to be at the doctor's consultation room. So what, as the Kenya Society of Hematology and Oncology organization, as you are, what are you doing to increase awareness? Because what I'm hearing right now is that we have so many interventions out there, but the public remains generally underexposed in regard to what is out there and how can they seek these interventions that are out there.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
So the Kenya Society for Hematology and Oncology has been working closely with the National Cancer Control Program, and this has been basically as part of supporting the technical working groups. This is around defining guidelines and guidelines for treatment, guidelines for screening, guidelines for supportive care, but also looking beyond that to how do we then educate, because one of the barriers that we haven't talked about as well is the health system itself, where we know that on average patients will see 4 to 6 healthcare providers, Regina, before definitive diagnosis of their cancer is made. So it's really about thinking about our broader communities, even before we go to the lady on the ground. We do need to make sure that if she's able to go to a health system or a health center, the physician is or healthcare provider
able to actually identify what she's ailing from the onset. And talking about accessing that particular medical facility, we are currently going through the budget making process. Yeah. Is this an avenue in which Wanjiko, or rather the citizenry, can actually use to implore the government to bring, or rather to come up with policy regulations that are going to bring the cost of care, cancer treatment and care down? Is this an avenue that the citizenry can explore?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think there's an opportunity for, I would say, collective. This is really a call to arms for everyone, because we all have opportunities to make a difference in our patients' lives. And sometimes we think about advocacy as just talking about, increasing the funding, but it's all these different aspects that exist. Patients are currently getting discriminated on a day-to-day basis. They're having legal whatevers where they're getting terminated because their employers are saying, you're already
terminally ill, you're not giving us value for our money.
Or you're having so many sick days. Yeah. So how do we build the legislature that actually protects patients or anyone who's suffering from a chronic illness? We then think about how do we then, increase or think about the funding, because right now we're supporting treatment. We're not necessarily as invested in supporting the screening aspects. And whereas we're saying it's not an infinite kitty, but how do we start to think collectively? Where are the economists when we need them? Where are the clinicians who can all come together and sit down and say, let's have a conversation around how we can provide value-based care, which is not only quality, but it's also cost-effective. And so there's definitely different avenues that we can push. We do know that in countries that have universal healthcare coverage, the outcomes of not just cancers, but any other chronic diseases are actually much better. And so if we're thinking about how do we mobilize, how do we push for change, because it's not just, sometimes we think about let's push for cancer, let's push for kidney disease, let's push for no. We're saying let's come together and push for better health services, because health is our basic right, and we should we should all be able to access timely, affordable care. And that is really one of the functions of government, that they should be able to provide that for us. And so we really have an opportunity to push and see how we can help to make a difference.
Now, the Cancer Summit is set for in less than, a fortnight or so, between the 2nd and the 4th of February. From where you sit, person who is, embroiled in all this, within the value chain, as you say. Yes. What are your expectations of this Cancer Summit in regard to the theme of this year, and also where we are as a country, looking at the prevalence rate as well as the mortality rate where cancer is concerned?
Yeah. I think I'm really excited about this upcoming conference, because we had our own Kenya International Cancer Conference just in December last year, and we were really looking at how do we have a multidisciplinary approach to care, and how do we use innovations. And I think this is the next step to that, in the sense of we have a multi-sectoral, multi-stakeholder audience or participation, and people who you wouldn't traditionally think about in the sort of health space. And so you're looking at how do we get, as I was saying, the economists on the table, how do we get the manufacturers, because we're saying cancer care is expensive, drugs are expensive. Why aren't we manufacturing our own? Why aren't we manufacturing our own health commodities? What are the innovations and technologies that we can use in order for us to improve care? And so it's really having that conversation where the education is, because unless we educate our women and girls and teach them you need to have agency over your body, you need to go for regular screening, you need to get a vaccine, they're not necessarily going to be able to have that conversation. So it's really around how do we get the whole community, as it were, and of course the financiers, because at the end of the day this has to make financial sense, and we have to think about how do we develop sustainable models. And so that's really the ethos of what we're hoping to achieve. So I know it's shooting for the stars, but I think just having that conversation and really having that continuing engagement is really going to go a long way towards us trying to solve some of our problems.
Off the cuff, whenever someone or a family member is actually diagnosed with cancer, usually they comes in with stigma and the thought that, hey, we are already going to lose this person. But from where you sit, I know you're a medical practitioner, you're an oncologist and such, and tonight would want to assure Kenyans. The question is, do we have the requisite capacity in terms of equipment, in terms of medical, in terms of drugs, as well as human resource to actually cure or treat cancer locally without having to think of, hey, I'm taking my person to India, I have to do a Harambe because this person needs to seek medical health out of the country. Do we have the capacity to treat cancer here within our borders?
Absolutely. I think as I said, over the last 10 years, we've definitely seen an expansion in services. One of the things as a breast cancer surgeon and a cancer researcher as well is has been that, as you said, the stigma around cancer equals death. However, we do know, and this is why we're really trying to push the preventative care agenda, is that cancers, if detected early and treated appropriately, are just like any other chronic illness. And not only are they treatable, they're potentially curable. And so the real drive is for early detection of our cancers. If we're able to pick them up early, we're able to do less aggressive treatments, and which of course is going to have less financial implications. So definitely earlier cancers are easier and cheaper to treat.
But then let me throw the spanner in the works.
Yes.
I go to the consultant, a physician, because that's where we start. That is our point of entry. But by the time I actually am diagnosed and told that, Regina, this is X, Y, Z, you're in stage 2 to stage 3 of cancer. I have been going through these screenings and seeing these physicians, but they're not they do not, I'm trying to avoid the word, they do not have the requisite capacity to tell me exactly what I am suffering from. I find myself over 2-3 years, I have been visiting this particular practitioner, but we have been treated for a different ailment altogether. Absolutely. So how do we rectify that?
And so that's part of one of the areas that, as I said, as the Kenya Society for Hematology and Oncology, we are working hard to try and ameliorate, because what we do realize is that the skill sets exist, but before the patient gets to the oncologist, there's quite a number of barriers. And so it's looking at how do we strengthen our primary healthcare physicians and healthcare providers. And there's been lots of concerted efforts, not just from KESHO, but also from the National Cancer Control Program to train community healthcare providers, community healthcare physicians on the common signs and symptoms. We've now tried to incorporate innovations to that, where there's now M-Saratani, there's apps, there's, if you have bundles, you get online or download it to look at what the common signs and symptoms. But then also beyond that, it's looking at how do you strengthen the system, because as soon as you pick up a diagnosis, and what are the patient referral pathways, and that's what has been critical in trying to figure out. Strengthening that is going to be critical in ensuring that patients access timely and affordable care.
Now, in one minute or so, let's bring this to a close. From where you sit, what do you think we need to do different to actually, stem the prevalence of mortality when it comes to matters of cancer in the country? Dr. Ari.
I think that has several levels, as it were. But from a policy level, we do need to really push for early detection and prevention and early detection. From a community level, we do need to raise the awareness, not just among healthcare providers, but also the community around the basic signs and symptoms. But then from an individual level, we do need to think about how do we change our own health-seeking behavior. Somebody made the remark that for those who drive, that we treat our cars better than we treat our bodies. Exactly, because every couple of hours every couple of miles you take it in for a service, whereas for our bodies you wait for the body to break down and then you take it to the hospital. So it's really about changing our health-seeking behavior, but not also being a little more nuanced in the sense that I would say being our brothers and sisters keepers. So if it's not just taking charge of your health, but also empowering the people around you to have those conversations around health and going for regular checks and screening. In terms of decreasing a risk from a personal level, we do know that diet and exercise do go a long way towards not necessarily preventing, but definitely minimizing the risk. So I would say these preventative lifestyle strategies, diet and exercise, screening where appropriate, and again, really just moving the community along with you will definitely go a long way towards us trying to shift the narrative.
Very well said. Our guest tonight has been none other than Dr. Miriam Mutebi, who is the chairperson of the Kenya Society of Hematology and Oncology, abbreviated as KESHO. Her word tonight is that we need to change our health-seeking behavior as well as think preventative rather than, curative in regard to matters of cancer. That brings us close to a conversation on cancer tonight, given that we are expecting to have a summit, a National Cancer Summit, to be held next month between the 2nd and 4th, where various stakeholders are going to be converging to talk about, the cancer burden and the interventions therein. Thank you very much, ma'am, for your time. But now let's cross over to matters sports. And I know if you're an Arsenal fan and a Manchester United fan, you have been glued to your screens watching those particular matches that ended on a 2. Actually, Arsenal ended at the top of the table as usual, well, scoring 3-2. But before we get there, let's have a quick breather. We'll be right back.
Next on Pakani.
We are officially conducting an inquest into the undercover operation dubbed Hidden Leaf. Tukisuspect wewe